Thank you very much, Astrid. We are still, as you can see, in the main reading room of the University Library Belgrade. Once again, it will be the host, this time virtually, to a landmark speech, the opening keynote speech at the 50th LIBER annual conference. We have very high expectations of the speaker, who is a world-famous digital humanist. But please, do let me transfer the mic to the host of the keynote session so that he can introduce the speaker. This pleasure goes to Mr. Julien Roche, the Director of the Libraries and Learning Center at University of Lille and LIBER Vice President. Julien, please take the floor.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to welcome you again. Thank you for joining us for this Keynote LIBER 2021 online session. My name is Julien Roche and I'm the Director of the Libraries and Learning Center at the University of Lille. I'm also the Vice President of LIBER. We will listen to our first keynote speaker this morning with a keynote speech regarding digital libraries, the next frontier. But let's start with some housekeeping notes before we get started. So first, the session is recorded, so we'll share the record and slides afterwards with you. We'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the session. If you have any question, please send it through the chat window at any time. Following the online conference, you will receive a link to a short survey. Please fill it out. We welcome your feedback. Finally, it's the second consecutive year that LIBER delivers its annual conference online in an effort to bring our community together, given the circumstances we all know. We hope this session will run smoothly, but we ask for your patience in case of any technical issues. So in today's sessions, we will hear a presentation from Toma Tasovac from DARIA EU regarding digital libraries, the next frontier. Toma Tasovac is Director of the Belgrade Center for Digital Humanities and the Director of the Pan-European Digital Research Infrastructures for the Arts and Humanities. With an academic background in comparative literature and degrees from Harvard, Princeton and Trinity College Dublin, Toma's areas of scholarly expertise include historical lexicography and the development of language resources, data modeling, digital editions, and research infrastructures. He is the co-editor, together with Sally Chambers, of the forthcoming book, Digital Humanities, An Introduction for Librarians. Toma has served on a number of major bodies, such as European Research Council, Europeana Research, and GPI Cultural Heritage. He has played leadership roles in numerous digital humanities projects funded by national and international agencies, including Erasmus+, Horizon 2020, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. So Toma, I'm handing to you now.
Okay, I am not allowed to turn on my video, but that should be fixed soon. And I need to share my screen. Okay, can you just confirm that you see my first slide? I can't hear anybody at the moment. Can you just, yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julien. It's a real pleasure to be able to address you today. I have to say that I'm a big fan of keynote lectures, and not just because they are ego boosters, which they are, but because they are rare luxury items on the academic circuit today. Time is our most precious commodity, and we are rarely given the chance to speak at some length, develop an overarching argument, contextualize things properly, and most importantly, think about the big picture. We are all experts in very, very limited areas of knowledge, and we have our hobby horses, so to speak. But for me, it's always a source of immense joy when I can take a step back and, just think for a while. So I am very, very grateful for this opportunity. And I wish you lots of patience for the next 45 minutes or so, because trust me, you will need it. Before I begin, I feel compelled to make a couple of disclaimers. First, about the title. If we're being honest, we all know that titles, and especially those that need to be submitted to a conference ahead of time, are some of the least reliable pieces of academic mumbo jumbo, right? Titles are settled long before the actual lecture is prepared. They have to be vague so that you don't overpromise, yet they should also sound a little bit bombastic so that people show up to hear you speak. So you can imagine, when I actually sat down to prepare this talk, I was, as somebody who was trained as a literary scholar in the 20th century, a millennium ago, actually, I got irritated by my own title. A cynical view of literary scholarship could be described with one phrase. We are taught to make mountains out of molehills, right? If you are a good literary scholar, you can make fantastic leaps of faith and judgment from the tiniest textual features, such as punctuation or grammatical constructions or turns of phrase, all the way to this kind of social, cultural, and philosophical revelations. But because you're trained to do that, you become a really annoying and pedantic reader, including of your own texts. So when I sat down to write this talk, my inner monologue focused on the question of the grammatical number in the title, both before and after the colon. Why are there multiple digital libraries in my title, but only one single frontier that I'm advertising to the world? Who on earth is going to buy this argument that the digital libraries, which are always many things at once, can be reduced to a single issue, a single challenge? Back in the early 90s, Christine Borgman very nicely defined the digital library as a multiplicity, not a singularity. The digital library is a service, it's an architecture, it's a set of information resources, databases of text, numbers, graphics, sounds, video, etc. I would have some qualms about the word databases here, but we'll leave that for some different discussion. And finally, a set of tools and capabilities to locate, retrieve, and utilize the information resources available. So if we really wanted to speak of the next frontier or the next frontiers properly, we would have to address all these different layers. Librarians know that better than anybody, because libraries themselves, even without the digital component, are incredibly complex systems. But what is done is done. I could ask you for forgiveness for my grammatical irresponsibility, or I could, once again, as a literary person by training, try to construct my argument around a single issue and try to turn that into a virtue rather than a shortcoming. And I like a challenge, so that's what I decided to do. And here we come to my second disclaimer, which is that we are all prisoners of our own disciplines. I don't want to sound too harsh or too depressing, but the older I get, the more I realize how my views on things that I'm currently interested, ranging from digital editions and digital collections to research infrastructures, continue to be shaped and influenced by my early training as a literary scholar. I have over time moved closer to linguistics and language resources and the general questions of culture and technology, but I continue to obsess about texts, textuality, textual data modeling, and textual analytics. So in order to make this lecture manageable, both for me and for you, I will focus only on one aspect of digital libraries, and that is the question of how they handle texts. Now, I'm perfectly aware that digital libraries are not only textual. I know how important audiovisual heritage is, and I know what incredible progress has been made over the past years in the way we deliver different kinds of media. I'm a huge fan of IIIF. I think it's an infrastructural masterpiece, and I have no doubt that IIIF will continue to innovate and lead us into a bright, prosperous, and very, very colorful future. At the same time, however, I think we should acknowledge textuality as the foundational feature of digital libraries, because even when they deal with non-textual artifacts, libraries cannot escape textuality because of metadata, because of resource guides, etc., right? Librarians are, whether they like it or not, textual beings. So with those two disclaimers in place, I can now, without any sense that I'm being a cheat, say that I will speak of the digital library in the sense of a set of tools and capabilities to locate, retrieve, and utilize the textual information resources. And even more precisely, I will focus on what it means to utilize the textual information resources. And I will do all that from the disciplinary perspective of digital humanities. I don't think this is a cop-out. And if I'm any good at reading texts and extracting higher level meaning out of textual minutiae, I should be able to get us to a vantage point from which we can assess the present and perhaps, if we are really lucky, catch the glimpse of a possible or desirable future. I do believe that the disciplinary perspective of digital humanities is not just any disciplinary perspective. Now, I don't want to start any discipline wars and claim that any single discipline is more important than other. But I do believe that the perspective of digital humanities is of particular relevance for the creators and maintainers of digital libraries. In the same way that I believe that digital libraries and all institutions of cultural heritage have a great deal of experience and knowledge to meaningfully contribute to digital humanities research. One of the most important challenges facing digital humanities today is how to consolidate and repurpose available tools, how to create reusable but flexible workflows, and ultimately, how to integrate and disseminate knowledge instead of merely capturing it and encapsulating it. This technical and intellectual shift is what I like to refer to as the infrastructural turn in digital humanities. So at this high level of abstraction, we're really interested in similar things. And I'm not saying anything particularly original here. The conceptual model for DH and libraries developed by Chris Allen Sua back in 2013 still holds. It stresses a continuum of information content associated with cultural heritage institutions. And like any model, it is a simplified abstraction of a complex reality. Like any model, it may break down or be shown not fully adequate when applied to every individual object in every single instance. So what does this model do? It suggests a multiplicity of ways in which libraries and DH may support, engage, and create with one another. It's built around two axes. The horizontal one represents information content types found in libraries, ranging from first-order content, i.e. artifacts collected by cultural heritage institutions because they are deemed worthy of preservation, right, on the one hand, to second-order content, i.e. content about the content of other information artifacts, metadata, bibliographic records, resource guides, etc. The vertical axis represents who or what is doing the producing, i.e. the extent to which the production of information content types is performed by humans or machines. Needless to say, individual artifacts may not easily be described as pure content or pure representation. A digital edition of an 18th century novel encoded in TI-XML will contain the text of the novel, i.e. first order content, but also metadata in the TI header, as well as interpretative scholarly markup, annotation, commentary. Data visualizations could, on the one hand, be classified as second order content because they represent data about data. But when viewed as interpretative narratives in their own right, they can rightly be viewed as a first order content type. So things can get messy in the digital domain. The goal of this model is not to help us shove individual artifacts into predefined conceptual boxes, but to capture the broad range of activities involved with the work of cultural heritage institutions. One aspect of the DH in the libraries problematic that this model does not address is the question of utilization of information resources, right? Utilization, if you remember, comes from the definition that from Christina Borgman that I cited in the beginning. I wish I had the skill to build a representation of a 3D model. I don't. I'm a 2D guy to my core. I think most kids these days would probably build a fancy representation of a 3D model very easily, but I can't do that. But if you try to imagine a third dimension to this model that I just showed you, it will be built around an axis of utilization and the question of who reads texts in the digital library and how. Because the human to computer axis in the model I showed you was about who produces content. And I think the real challenge lies in the question of who consumes the content and how. And that is the dimension along which I will move for the rest of my talk. To understand this challenge and this axis, I can now finally reveal to you the main thesis of my talk, which will come in two flavors, the kind of appropriately academic, non-committal and polite version, which would read, digital libraries do not yet take full advantage of electronic textuality. And a slightly more polemic or bombastic version would be, digital libraries should stop treating text as an atavistic relic of the print culture. In what sense and why so dramatic? The main difference between a material artifact and its digital surrogate is in their inherent value. The value of a material artifact is in itself, intellectually, aesthetically, culturally. The value of a digital artifact is in what you can do with it. So today we have not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of digital artifacts, text, sounds, images that represent across a huge time span the human record. So what are we doing with it? The question really becomes, what are we doing with culture, both in terms of heritage and contemporary production? What are the modes of reading our cultural heritage? Are we focusing only on a tiny % of canonical works? Or are we trying to use all available methods to probe it, challenge it, and transform it? DH encompasses a wide range of scholarly activities, from digital philology and creation of digital editions on the one hand, to text mining, distant reading, algorithmic criticism on the other side of the spectrum, to name just a few representative strands of DH scholarship. Members of DH, as a community of practice, deal with electronic text not as a static artifact, but rather as a complex, multidimensional, and multi-layered data sets that can be read, analyzed, and manipulated in order to arrive at new knowledge about them. That doesn't mean that hermeneutic approaches based on close reading and persistent qualitative analysis will cease to exist. God forbid, I would be the last one to wish something like that. I want people to continue reading closely. I want people to continue reading poetry. I want people to continue reading even without any digital tools. But it just means that scholars nowadays can and should be able to expand their methodological repertoire to include quantitative methods. DH does in no way obliterate the pre-computational approaches to textuality. It certainly doesn't do away with textual materiality. People will continue to study clay tablets and inscriptions in stone or on coins and the illuminations of medieval manuscripts, etc. DH is not, and I hope it will never be, the paradigm shift to end all paradigms or the last act in the grand drama of the humanities. Computational approaches should be seen as an expansion of the methodological landscape in the humanities, no more and no less than that. Which is why, from the point of view of digital libraries, we need to make text both human and machine readable. A human readable text can come in many different formats, right? A book or a special collections manuscript is human readable. A scan of the book or the manuscript is human readable. A PDF of the book or the manuscript is human readable. And most digital libraries use interfaces that imitate the process of reading print books, including turning the pages or using a slider as an interface element to quickly browse through the digital surrogate. And that's all fine and dandy. We like humans and we want them to have an intuitive reading experience in digital libraries. No doubt about that. But a human readable artifact is not the same thing as a machine readable artifact. A machine readable artifact must be in a format that can be processed by the computer. An image of a printed page is not machine readable, even though it is delivered from a server and displayed in an internet browser. You cannot copy and paste text from it. You cannot search inside it. You cannot create a list of most common words out of it. You can't because the computer doesn't understand the scan as text. It sees it as an image and that's all. Raw, unstructured data, for instance, the extracted OCR text, which is saved as a text file, is already a big improvement. The machine can do all kinds of things with the content, which also means that the human can instruct the machine to work with the text. But with unstructured data, you pretend to live in a world in which all words were born equal. The preface to a novel is lumped together with the text of the novel and the footnotes or the endnotes. And the machine can't really tell them apart. So if you want to search the text or do some kind of statistical analysis on it, analyze how this particular author used this particular word, you will end up with many false positives because you will include the commentary in the text that you are analyzing. And that's why the object of desire for many digital humanists is text as structured data, usually an XML document which has a clear and logical structure. Most of us in this field who work on this type of data work with TEI that I'm sure is quite well known amongst you as well. And so this skeleton of a TI document shows you this clear and logical structure that each TI document starts with a TI header, which is where you have the metadata. Then you can have the facsimile element, which will contain links to the images of the text file if they exist. And finally, then you will move to the section called text, which can have 3 subsections: front, body, and back. Of course, TI gets much more complex than that. There's some 500 something elements in it, and you can do very shallow or very, very deep encoding of texts with TEI. But the point is that you can establish from the very outset a clear structure of what's what, even at these kind of higher levels of granularity. 20 years ago, John Unsworth conceptualized scholarly primitives as basic functions which are common to any scholarly activity in the humanities, independent of discipline, theoretical orientation, or era. He suggested 7 recursive and interrelated scholarly primitives: discovering, annotating, comparing, referring, sampling, illustrating, and representing, which he saw as the basis for tool-building enterprises in digital humanities. They remain to this day a good starting point for understanding what type of activity DHs are engaged in. When we move from the type of activities described by Unsworth to texts as objects of humanistic inquiry, we should look at different areas of interest or concern when it comes to digital libraries. We should ask ourselves about the formats and text delivery methods. We should think about the status of the text in the library or the text-paratext boundaries, and what the library lets us do with the digital text. And finally, we should be interested in metrics and traces of use of textual library holdings, especially when it comes to scholarly interventions. To be truly useful for textual and literary studies, the digital library must explode the text by providing full content searchability, concordances and indexes, metadata, of course, but hyperlinks, critical markup, etc. And it must do all of that instead of freezing it as an image, which, as we said, albeit digital, is computationally neither intelligible, nor computable, nor modifiable as text. What literary scholars and digital humanists need are smart digital libraries in which a text is not an object, or not only an object, but also a service, not a static entity, but an interactive method. The text must be computationally exploitable so that it can be sampled and used and not simply reproduced in its entirety. Such a radically atomic approach to textuality poses a host of challenges: legal, ethical, technical, and intellectual, to name just a few. But it opens up the possibility of creative engagement with the digital text in literary studies through text mining, statistical text comparison, data visualization, hypertextual systems, etc. Once we move towards the implementation of these explodable, atomizable texts, we can then start having text as services with their own application programming interfaces, or APIs. The digital library of the future is not only the virtual distributed place where digital texts live, but rather a place in which they interact with each other and with various tools for textual analysis. It would be useful to start thinking of access to text and metadata through a multi-tiered prism. Some users, most users, will be happy to reach them through a graphical user interface, i.e. via a library portal. But some users will want to download textual assets, either to read them locally or to run their tools on them on their local machines. And some other users would like to access textual data through APIs so that they can integrate them in their own web-based tools and pipelines. The increasing appeal of web services in the context of what I call the infrastructural turn in digital humanities is both technical and social. On the technical level, web services let heterogeneous agents dynamically access and reuse the same sets of data using APIs and standard workflows. And on the social level, web services help overcome the problem of so-called shy data, data that you can kind of hang out with in public places, but you can't take home with you. Designing DH projects and digital libraries in line with the principles of the service-oriented architecture is therefore an important step in the creation of open scholarly ecosystems. We need to anchor digital scholarly methods in digital library workflows and develop tools and services for different types of scholarly primitives in modular, dynamic, research-driven digital collections. In an ideal DH-friendly world, digital libraries will provide access to machine-readable texts as structured data, will develop well-documented APIs for both metadata and full text access, will provide access when copyright allows it, of course, to data dumps for both content and metadata, offer layers of automatic and semi-automatic structural, linguistic, and semantic annotations with support for crowdsourced corrections, and integrate dictionaries and other type of reference services to be queried directly from the text in graphical user interfaces. Yet the main challenge I see facing both digital libraries and DH communities is how to establish data enrichment workflows. How do we get the digital library to be the repository of both digital texts and textual annotations? How do we get the digital library to be a virtual place for sharing, reusing, and repurposing content, including scholarly content? I will give you my favorite example. If there was a prize for the worst OCR in the history of the world, this digital artifact would be a great contender. Now, just to clarify things. One, this Serbian-German dictionary from the 18th century was canned by Google Books a while ago in that first mass digitization rush. And OCR technology has made huge advances. So this is not about dissing OCR at all. If I'm dissing anything or anybody here, it is the idea that 2D digitization, digitization of 2D objects is a done deal, that we can now move to 3D. And nothing could be further from the truth. As this example shows, early digitization efforts have an expiry date. Some things are simply not good enough. So in this example, we have OCR, which doesn't contain a single correct word. And even the ones that appear seemingly correct, we can read Fällige in German or Boga in Serbian, are false positive because Fällige should be heilige and Boga should be Bog. I mean, a different case and a different spelling, etc. So let's imagine a scenario in which a professor of historical linguistics checks out this dictionary, gives it to his class. They fix the OCR, but they do so much more. They annotate the dictionary. They write notes about the historical background or the interpretation or a history of criticism. And then all this knowledge that was created surrounding the library text never makes it back to the library, never makes it back to this particular digital surrogate. A year later, some other professor, although if we're being honest, there's only so many people in the world who study 18th century lexicography. I'm one of them, but this is an imaginary scenario. Next year, somebody else comes to check out this dictionary and to work with a different class on it. And he or she will face the same bad OCR and start the whole thing from scratch. I think that's just ridiculous. I just don't think it makes any sense. And the fact that we're in the 21st century and that we think so highly of our technology and our workflows means that we really should scratch a little under the surface. Now we can circle back to the main thesis that I unloaded on you in my very long introduction to this talk. The printing press revolutionized access to knowledge because it made it possible to produce and disseminate texts at an unprecedented rate. The classical model of the library was both an archive and a temple. The library was a defense against forgetting, an institution that preserved not only a system of values, but also certain rituals of using knowledge. The book as a physical object, and consequently, a model of text that is final and unchangeable. The digitization has changed a lot of things. Libraries are facing challenges at all possible levels, dealing with access policies and interactions with commercial interests and user-generated data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the digital text has so far, with some notable exceptions, continued to live an old-fashioned kind of lifestyle. It is professionally cataloged, it is findable, it is retrievable, but it remains to a large extent unchangeable. It remains as a static object, an unfinished potential, and a kind of wannabe book on the imaginary shelves of digital libraries. Digital scholarly work that happens around texts happens elsewhere, not in the library. It happens in classrooms, it happens at universities, in research centers, among citizen scientists, but it very rarely makes it back to the library. Now you could say, hold on, scholars still write scholarly articles and publish scholarly monographs, and they will definitely find their way to the library, and the library will continue to preserve them. And that there's no question about that. What I'm trying to point out here is that the environment in which we create knowledge and the processes by which we produce knowledge have changed once we irretrievably moved into the digital domain. The scholarly article is not the only scholarly output these days. A lot of what scholars do happens around and inside electronic texts. If the libraries don't acknowledge the fundamental ways in which electronic textuality has changed scholarly workflows, we may end up widening the gap between research and preservation, instead of using this moment as an opportunity to transform the very idea of what a digital library is and what it can become. Often in the scholarly domain which I inhabit, our main challenges are not technological, but actually social and cultural. Money is always an issue, but I can't even build a 3D model, let alone produce a magic way to generate unlimited funds. So like Alcoholics Anonymous, let's ask God or whomever to grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change. But let's think about what we can do. Let's start thinking of texts in digital libraries as layered, versioned objects. We already have a fantastic model to learn from, the open source software development community. We wouldn't be where we are today if some clever people didn't come up with version control systems such as Git or Subversion. If text can be versioned, so can metadata. I may appear or want to fashion myself as some kind of hippie rebel, but I'm not. I'm in love with good, well laid out structures. I love systems that work, right? But I also cannot help but look for ways in which we can use technology not as a leveling field, but as a way to manage and explore complexity. Loss of control is scary, so this is certainly not something anybody should rush into, but we should explore the potential of enrichable evolving metadata. I would love to live in a world in which cultural heritage is not just preserved, but is actually kept alive. And one of the ways in which it can be kept alive is by creating preservation environments which allow and keep the record of the cultural and scholarly transformations of cultural heritage. For instance, a traditional understanding of an edition of a text was that of a static work with erudite commentary from a single author, most likely published as a book. A digital representation of a text can incorporate its own versions, annotations, and interpretations, not by one, but by many scholars. Call me naive, but I really think that this kind of layering and the possibility of preserving multiple perspectives on the objects of cultural heritage should be possible in digital libraries. I would love to be a consumer of texts in digital collections that come equipped not only with persistent identifiers, those are easy, but tools for fine-grained citability, i.e., ability to point to structural elements within textual resources. And for that to happen, again, we need to make this notion of text as a service, as opposed to text as a finite object, a reality. If digital libraries open up their textual resources to external tools or make their digital collections easier to download and process locally, they will also be able to make a major contribution to the reproducibility of digital scholarship around cultural heritage. Changing the perspective from text as a static document to text as a service that, despite its dynamic nature, should still be curated, supported, reproduced, and validated, requires an architectural reorientation on how text data should be stored, served, and exchanged, and the way annotation tools and algorithmic analysis should amend digital data. And I know that I'm asking for a lot, but as I said in the beginning, a keynote is not the place to be modest. All this may sound a bit too abstract, a bit too pretentious, and a bit too ambitious. I'm aware of that, which is why I would like to offer some concrete references that may help you think about some of these issues if you choose to do so. I sincerely apologize to those who wish this day had never happened, but it's too late for that. So late in the year, Facet Publishing will release a volume that I'm co-editing with Sally Chambers called Digital Humanities: An Introduction for Librarians. Unlike my talk, the book will provide some practical advice on how to embed DH activities in the library and provide some examples of successful partnerships and collaborations. Open a Glam Lab is a fabulous book co-written by 16 people at a book sprint, which took place in Doha, Qatar in 2019 at an event coordinated by Mahindra May and Milena Dobreva. A library lab is a place for experimenting with digital collections and data. It is a place where researchers, artists, entrepreneurs, educators, and the interested public can collaborate with an engaged group of partners to create new collections, tools, and services that will help transform the future ways in which knowledge and culture are disseminated. You should also check out Collections as Data. There's actually two projects, Collections as Data, always already computational, and Collections as Data Part to Whole, both US-based initiatives that explore developing cultural heritage collections that support computationally driven research and teaching. And finally, think of Daria, the digital research infrastructure for the arts and humanities, as your friend. I really didn't have time to talk about Daria today because I wanted to do a talk on one single issue. But I would like to draw your attention to a Daria position paper on cultural heritage from a humanities research perspective that I co-authored with two Darians, Sally Chambers and Erzsébet Tóth-Cifra. The paper is really relevant to the topic that I addressed today, but the approach in the position paper is quite different from what I did today. It touches upon the questions of EU policy, strengthening Europeana's role in research, open science, the Cultural Heritage Data Reuse Charter as a way to establish principles and mechanisms for improving the use and reuse of cultural heritage resources by researchers. We talk about the question of monitoring the digitization of European cultural heritage, the transnational impact of digitized cultural heritage, and the potential of artificial intelligence and digital transformation through capacity building. It's not a long paper, but it's worth checking out for different angles, which we as Darians consider crucial in future developments of digital cultural heritage. I think research infrastructure and digital libraries are ideal candidates for forging partnerships and moving forward in the direction that I tried to outline today. So I hope that we will meet again. Many, many thanks for bearing with me until the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Toma, for this brilliant talk and with very inspiring ideas. You described a bright future. I'm not sure we can achieve that in the coming months, but we will probably try to work out on that. So I'm asking colleagues who have been listening to your talk if they have some questions to put that in the chat so that I can pass them to you and you can answer. But I can probably start with maybe a first question. You mentioned the need to enrich the content and to work, to have a close work between, on one hand, librarians managing, curating the libraries, the digital libraries, and on the other hand, scholars and researchers. So can you give a little more example of the kind of collaboration we could develop, and not only the kind of collaboration, but the way we can have a success in those collaborations? Because you know that especially the researchers are very busy nowadays, and it's not quite easy to have to start the right conversation between librarians managing digital libraries on one hand and researchers on the other hand. They are running out of time because of many involvement in the university and for their research. So what would be your advice to help us connecting a little more our activity with the researchers themselves? Absolutely.
I think you are right. There is all these things that I'm proposing are not easy and are not there are no quick solutions to them. I think when you talk about the collaboration between research and cultural heritage, the issue is not only time, which we all lack. There are also kind of structural, systemic problems that we have that come from the fact that we usually, in most countries, researchers are under the Ministry of Science, and cultural heritage in the Ministry of Culture. And so at the policy level, we have different funding calls, and we have different kind of authorities to respond to. And in my mind, there is not enough cross-sectoral, there are exceptions to everything, but there's not enough systemic collaboration at the policy level. This applies to national institutions, but also at the European level. So the first thing that I would want to see, and this is something that I think is not up to individual researchers, but it is exactly up to institutions like DARIA, like LIBER, so institutions that represent large swathes of researchers and cultural heritage professionals, is to work on the policy level to lobby for more opportunities to work together. So that's on a big policy level. And as far as how to start and how to get involved, I think I really believe in the library lab model, right? I don't think anybody should try to build a perfect system that does everything. It's just not manageable, it's not realistic. But what we can do, in what libraries, in my mind, should do, is try to establish these small incubators, which my colleagues call DH labs. You know, you could have researcher in residence program. You could have kind of calls for young researchers who want to come and explore how to digitally work with your data and things like that. And to start building use cases with those people who are interested and who have time. And the final point that I want to make is that, again, all the things that I was talking about were from the perspective of digital humanities. I do understand that digital humanities is just one part of the humanities. There's lots of researchers who will not be able and will not be interested in this kind of research. But I can guarantee you that you will be able to, if you can set up a system in your library, you will be able to find DH researchers who are willing to come, and not just because they will, give you the gift of their time, but because this is a mutually beneficial relationship. The libraries get to showcase their collections in new ways, and researchers get to work directly with library professionals and maybe help with improving workflows and, I don't know, access to metadata and content and things like that.
You also said very interesting things regarding the fact that the future digital libraries must be, on one hand, human readable, and on the other hand, machine readable. The question for me is, do you think that we will have in the future a kind of a tool fitting all, or do we need to have, let's say, separate services, meaning that, let's say, something like a front office, which will be readable by humans, and some kind of a tool totally different for machine reading? How do you see that future? Because of course, we need to combine them, but I think that reading as a human or reading through a machine, it's a different process.
Completely.
So how do you see the combination of the two?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think I can predict the kind of the architectural setups that will enable these kind of dual readings, but I think the difference between them is not so big if you think about the formats and the structured data that can be in the back office of both of these, right? What matters is how text is processed and structured and then displayed to the user. You can, if we develop, even and technology will improve, right? Many of the things that we now struggle with in terms of, having to post correct OCR, etc., things are getting better all the time. And I think tools for recognizing structural elements in text will also continue to improve. And if you have text as structured data, you can present it in multiple ways. So I don't want people to read the XML version, right? I want the XML version to be there so that machines can access it, and you can choose to display that to the reader in whatever intuitive and aesthetically pleasing way you choose to do. So yes, those will be different systems in different parts of the architecture, but what will always connect them is quality structured data. And that's my big hope. And that's why I also think that, humanities researchers who work in digital humanities, etc., and who they are not programmers, they don't have to be programmers, they don't have to be system developers, but their knowledge of text and knowledge of textual hierarchies and how texts work can help inform the technical developments. Humanities scholars are very good testers of your software. They have the uncanny ability to break things and to find things that don't work and things like that. So I think with a little bit of luck and greater developments in areas of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we will be able to reach a point where all these kind of things that I described were possible. And if I may just add one detail, I think we are in a transition period right now because we are still not used to the fact that, or let's say some humanities scholars have a problem with messy data that comes out of OCR and automatic processes, etc. Right? Humanities scholars, especially those who come from the tradition of what I call boutique digital editions, philological editions where every word and every punctuation mark matters, and these are manually crafted intellectual gadgets, so to speak. They view automatized processes as with suspicion, and they're right so, because the quality is not the same. But I think as we move in time, we will simply get more used to recognizing these as two complementary approaches, two complementary outputs. And we should just learn to manage our expectations and know that, yes, I mean, we have to learn how to live with disappointment, Yes, you will find mistakes in OCR, fine. But that shouldn't stop us from kind of pursuing this goal of making things as close to perfect as possible.
Thank you, Toma. I'm afraid we are getting out of time, so we need to stop there the question, but I'm sure that the attendees will have extra questions and they will contact you anyway if they have some. Thank you again for these great presentations. It was very inspiring. That's what we expect from a keynote. We don't expect to many practical things. We expect the vision for the future, and you delivered that. So thanks again. We will be sending anyway a link to the recording and the slides. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and please keep attending the conference. We have plenty more great speakers to come.